Hi there. Welcome to Business Leadership Podcast. In this podcast, I interview business leaders and industry experts to share their knowledge and experience to help you grow your business. I truly believe that sometimes a single insight can completely change your business directions and allow you to achieve your business goals. In this episode, I interviewed David Town. David is co-founder and principal at a Virtual Leadership Matters, and he's been helping business leaders to navigate through this ever-changing workplace environment. I think you will really enjoy my discussion now when David talks about the impact of this changing workplace environment on a business leaders themselves in on the personal development in how to manage expectation from your staff and from your customers in this virtual world, and also when he talks about that what's coming ahead in this virtual environment, how to navigate some of those challenges that business leaders are dealing with on a daily basis. Before you go, your feedback is always important. Buttons just below this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel. Stay tuned for new episodes every Monday morning. Until next time, enjoy. Have a good one. Hi guys, welcome to Business Leadership Podcast. Today my guest is David Tom. David's, he's the president at Your Leadership Matter and recently co-founder at Virtual Leadership Matter. David's been teaching and coaching people, business leaders, especially in the how to run effective companies, effective teams. And I'm looking forward to our discussion, David, and looking forward to learning from you. Thank you so much for your time today.
Glad to be here.
Thanks, David. If you tell us a little bit, how did you get involved in the leadership? If you, what you were doing before, and if you just a little bit of journey.
Great question. Yes. So my background is I graduated from business school, and then I went into a training project as a consultant for an organization, and fell in love with the work I was doing with the company. It was called Big V Pharmacies, and eventually went on with them full time. I became the head of human resources there, and all through that time, I thought about leadership development and training because that's where my roots had been. I moved to Shoppers Drug Mart when we got bought out. So I was the head of human resources, went through a merger, went to Shoppers for 2 years. Then I went to Loblaw companies. I had a role at Loblaw as my last role was the senior director of leadership and learning.
Sure.
And we did a project on leadership that was sponsored by the CEO. And I've always had a passion for leadership. And so when I left the corporate world, armed with my experiences as a leader in many executive teams and senior leadership roles at Loblaws particularly, I wanted to impact leadership within individuals and teams. So I started to do some consulting work, and I generated my own practice or developed my own practice, which I eventually called Your Leadership. I started off at David Town and Associates, but that wasn't a very clever name. Your Leadership Matters, and I've had a passion for seeing people make progress in really being able to make a difference and influence people as leaders. So. So that's kind of my passion, my background. I love what I do. I'm very fortunate.
Very, very interesting. So, you've been in this arena for many years, David. Where you see business leaders struggle, where is some of the challenges that you see from your perspective, and where some of the opportunity lies? Where you see with your practice generally?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've experienced. I'm a baby boomer, so I've experienced what we might call the old style of leadership. A little bit command and control, tell people what to do, and people do it because, being obedient was really important sort of in the environment I grew up in my early life. And so one of the things that I've seen that leaders struggle with is that many leaders have had success with this style of leadership. And so they don't see an imperative to change. And one of the things that I've recently done is to create a couple of models that really articulate what's needed for the change, because it's the challenge for leaders is that when something works, that it doesn't feel like I need to change it. The challenge with, I'll say, command and control or the old style of leadership where it's very directive is that, yes, it works, but it doesn't really get commitment. It gets people to comply with what they've been told. They'll do as much as they need to get by, to earn their paycheck, as it were. And so it gets some results, but not the greatest results. And the example, and there are better tools. There's a better way to lead, and that's building relationships, and supporting people, giving them feedback on a regular basis, whether it be corrective feedback or reinforcing feedback. And I call that commitment compliance oriented leadership. So,
Okay.
or sorry, commitment empowerment oriented leadership, because we want to empower people, give them autonomy. I love to read books. There's easily I've read 150 books in the last 10 years on leadership, and I'd say that the themes are consistently the same, which is to say that if we engage the heart, then we get much better performance from people, and it's a happier work environment. So, I really see leaders struggling with this change because they've done something that works.
Very interesting. So you mentioned that we had an old style of leadership. So it's just a simple in a style, or is it a cultural that we changing for over the so many years that now we have to come up with a different style of leadership? Because maybe the new millennials coming out of schools, they expect different from a leadership than that previous expectation people had, or what's been changing over the years that is forcing for us to change as well our leadership styles.
Yeah, good question. I would say a couple of things. You're absolutely correct. Anything I've read studying the millennials and then now Generation Z, they have different expectations. They've been treated differently at home as they've been raised. There's been more validation from their parents. When I was growing up as a young man, I had a very happy home, but my parents didn't fall over themselves to give me the praise Johnny recognition. And parents started to develop habits of doing more of this, I'll say, in the 70s and 80s. And so they started up to bring generations of kids who would go into the workplace and expect a lot more nurturing and a lot more of this validation. And so this idea of do your job, and if you're doing your job, I don't need to tell you that. That's what you're supposed to be doing. It doesn't really fit with the generation. So the challenge for leaders is, do I try to change the people coming in? And I hear lots of leaders saying, it's not like it used to be, and we need to do something about this generation. And I would say it's easier to adapt to the generation than it is to change their culture, as it were, as a different generation. I think the other thing is that even before there was the millennials coming into the workplace, there was evidence to say that if we treat people really well and respectfully, and we engage them in more dialogue and give them more empowerment, we're going to get better results. And so, we were at the front edge of that, I'll say, going back even into the 80s, but it's become more important. And what's interesting, I would say, is that now we're coming into the pandemic. So I would use the analogy of retail in a way, like leadership. So in retail, if you weren't online, no big deal before the pandemic, because you could work towards it. If you didn't have an online presence after that everybody was locked down, you were really struggling because you were losing those connections. And I would say in the same way, if you were a leader whose relationship with the employees was very command and control and very directive, that would work in an office environment much better than it would when people work remotely. When I'm working remotely, I have a chance to sit with my thoughts. I have more independence. And if I think about a boss who continually just barks at me, I'm not as motivated in my own environment alone to do good work. So we're realizing that the imperative to adjust to this and shift to this relationship-oriented leadership has been accelerated because of with the advent of the pandemic. And it's a better way to lead when you're leading virtually. And it's a better way to lead when we get back face to face. So even though it's more imperative virtually, just the same as retailers getting online, when people go back into the stores, it'll still be good to have an online presence. So we need to come at this in different ways.
Sounds like we were on that road already, that where we changing our leadership style, but pandemic simply just speeded up that. We pushed that to that area much faster that we were planning to go on that. So listen, we got to change our leadership style. Managing people from home is totally different skill set, as you mentioned, that than managing in a room and changing a different stuff. Does that create a challenge for leadership on a personal development side, David? That we had leaders had a different skill set. Now they have to develop a different style, a different skill set. What does that do for leaders on a personal development side? Listen, I got to develop some skill set that I may have to change my approach of managing people.
Yeah, I think the strategy there is, and we turn to coaching, which is, again, a new way of developing people. I'd say it's different now than it was a generation ago. When I was in my 30s, I'll say early 30s, if somebody had a coach, everybody's going, oh, Dave's got a coach. There must be something wrong, right?
Yeah.
Because you kind of got assigned a coach because there was a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Coaching has now, in the last 10 to 15 years, much taken on the role of being a great way to develop, because unlike training programs, and I facilitate lots of training programs with large groups. Those are effective, but only to a point, because the person doesn't necessarily have the tools or strategies for that personal transition to know what is it about my own style that I need to change and adapt.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think what's emerging is that people are seeing more of a combined effort where they'll do some training, learn about these concepts that are more relationship based, and then if they get some coaching. And the principle of coaching is that you help and support the person to make that change on their own terms, as opposed to it's not mentoring. It's not the same as mentoring, where you would tell somebody, here's how you should do things. So a really good coach doesn't spend the whole day giving advice. They really help guide the person and support that person in their process of change.
Mm-hmm.
I've been coaching for about the last 12 years. I got accredited as a coach about 4 years ago with the ICF. And I'll say what really excites me is watching an executive who's got some struggles. They're getting some feedback. They know that things aren't as good as they could be. Maybe their career is stalled. They'll get into a coaching relationship. They'll solve that dilemma of, how do I be a more engaging person? How do I make that shift from the style I used to have to a style that's more appealing
Mm-hmm.
for the employees and gets better performance? And then all of a sudden it opens up doors for them, and they see it for themselves. So it's not really what the coach does for them in terms of any kind of advice. It's really that a coach is going to help them unlock the potential that was always there.
Yeah, definitely that's a big help if you can, unlock potential. But other side of that is, if I'm a business leader, I may not see a lot of my blind spots that I can't, I'm not, I'm not looking the right way, or I just don't have information. I'm not looking the same way, because when you're going through something, you're not paying attention to a lot of blind spot. But somebody, like you or somebody coaching, they can see all the blind spot and they can guide you. Hey, listen, you want to pay attention to this area here where you neglecting. So seeing those blind spots, I think that's a huge help. I don't know if that's something you get into.
Yeah, it's a good question. So at the outset of a coaching engagement, typically part of the process and part of the package that a company or an individual would buy for a leader is to have a feedback process. So we would do both a psychometric assessment so those are those personality style inventories, things like a DISC is one, Hogan is another. You've got Berkman. There are several kinds of these assessments that tell people more about their own styles, their nature, because we should lead from who we are, really importantly. Yeah. And then I also have a process with questionnaires where I'll go seek feedback from peers, direct reports. That's and it's safe for people to talk about that, because I'm the one who collects all the data and then aggregates together. And I can think of one CEO I was dealing with. It was really interesting. He reads through the report and he goes, gee, the thing that really stands out for me is that I should be a better listener. He says, my wife's been telling me that for a couple of years now.
Yeah.
So he sort of laughed, but he said, maybe I should take this on. So the good news is, as you say, with the blind spots, is when a leader who really wants to be the best leader they can be sees the kind of feedback they get, it illuminates, it illustrates their strengths, but also gives them an opportunity to say, are there things that I would like to develop specifically? And then you can measure them again at a later point and really see progress. And so that's very appealing to somebody who really wants to be as successful as possible.
Very interesting. So, that brings to another, that when you talk about measurement, that brings to another, I see a lot of blogs on your site that you're talking about employee management or people management side of things. How big is that challenges for people? And if something changed in a COVID, that, what do you mean by first of all, when you mean by you get to coach people, when you say managing people, what do you mean by that? Is it simply coaching, make sure that they have a roadmap to success, or what, if you can walk us through, what do you mean by that coaching and managing people there?
Yeah. So maybe I could answer that by saying, I remember a client I had when I became a consultant who said to me, so Dave, I'd like you to help me with the job descriptions that we work on. And I don't want you to prepare those really detailed 3-page, 4-page job descriptions that take forever to read. I want you to keep it really simple.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, so under managing people, I said, here, I would put one bullet point with a few subpoints. And the one bullet point I would put is that I am here managing people to help the people who report to me be successful.
Mm-hmm.
So all the behaviors that come out that think, if you think about that, then you do all the things that's going to help someone be successful. So you're clear on setting expectations. You follow up with them to see how they're doing. You support them when they're struggling, and you give them honest feedback when they're struggling.
Mm-hmm.
You also give them recognition when they're doing well. If there's a skill issue, you give them training. If there's a bad fit, I mean, sometimes we put a person in a job where they're not going to be successful. They try hard and they're not successful. We have to have the courage to do that early in the game, as soon as we figured that out, as opposed to waiting for a long time. I remember, in managing people, one of the issues I would have as a senior HR leader is that people would come to me and say, I'm really struggling with this person. They might have to, we might have to terminate their employment. And I'd say, well, is that going to be a surprise to them?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer would be, well, might be. And I'd be saying, well, why don't they know? Well, I didn't want to hurt their feelings. And so, a lot of people out of compassion can't have that really honest conversation because they don't want to hurt somebody's feelings. My answer there is that it's going to hurt their feelings a lot more when you sit down and take their job away than if you told them they weren't doing it well. And if they can't succeed, we either need to find something else if it's a large enough organization that they could do well, or we need to help them find the right job for them in the marketplace. All terminations, as it were, all separations from organizations aren't ill-intended. They're in some cases, they can be very, very good for the employees, and it's how we support them to be successful. And back to, I really think it's as simple as management of people is help the people who work with you to be successful.
Mm-hmm. Did that change the process of managing people and guiding them and helping them, as you mentioned? Did that change with the COVID, that now we're not sitting in an office, but we still have to measure somebody's performance? We need to pay attention to how well they're doing in the jobs. How did that process change? Because now you can't see other people working in your office, walking around or having a water cooler discussion or getting a feedback. How does that change that? I know everybody working from home, and you're still trying to do assessment on that, how well they're doing, and trying to coach them in the right direction.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that the challenge working from home and then measuring people's productivity is a very real challenge. I was coaching somebody, this go back now a year, but it was a few months into the pandemic. And they said, Dave, I'm really struggling. I got to get back into the office. And I said, what's the struggle? Well, I need to know if my people are productive. And I said, and so, what is it about getting back in the office? He says, well, I have to see what they're doing. And I said, so when they're in the office, how do you know they're productive?
Yeah.
And he goes, yeah, good question. So seeing people sitting in their seats doesn't mean they're productive.
Yeah.
So to your point, we have to be more creative. We have to actually measure the work. So employees have been working from home for many, many years in the IT function, for example, because it's much more easily measurable work. I mean, you're writing code, you're doing this project. It's easier to measure what people are actually accomplishing, right? So we want people to be accomplished, not active. In other roles, it's not as easy to do that. So this is where when someone's working remotely, the imperative for the manager would be to do something like, so on Monday, have a check-in meeting and say to the person, rather than just say, have a good week, it's like, what do you think a good week looks like? What are you hoping to accomplish in this week? And how does that serve the goals that we've talked about? And even if it's not fully measurable, what you're doing is you're getting them to commit to productivity. So on Thursday, you can say, so you said that, you're going to get these things done. How did it go? Right. And when a person has committed on the Monday to something, they're likely to get to Thursday and they're going to have done that. In the old style, we'd sit in the office and then we'd walk around and say, how's it going, team, and keep up the good work. But there wasn't any real interaction to say, what exactly are you accomplishing today or tomorrow? What we thought is if people are out there busy, and once in a while we take a look at what they're doing or sit with them, busy doesn't mean accomplished. And
Mm-hmm.
this is the shift that's really going to need to happen. So some people say, I have to have the person face to face. There are employees who need to be in an office environment and need to get pushed on a regular basis. But
Mm-hmm.
I'd say that's the minority. Most people, if you trust them, they'll do good work. What they need to have is real clear understandings of what does success look like.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. And I would say some of the staff, they are more productive working from home than they were in office. But what we just didn't have a way of measuring it. Even when they were in office, we simply thought, hey, no, the person sits on a chair for 8 hours. We thought it was doing good work, and we just took it to that. But now people working from home, even though they're producing more work, we just don't have a data to compare because we never measured that when they were working in office. So
right.
A lot of business leaders I'm talking to, they say, well, we don't know if somebody's doing, but how did you measure that before? Before they just have any way of measuring it. Now at least you know how many tasks But I take a point as a great point that you set up a small goals or small task on a weekly basis, and then review the ongoing basis and measure it that way, and then provide some feedback on that aspect.
I really believe that when people are working remotely, you want to communicate shorter meetings more frequently.
Mm-hmm.
So more check-ins. I never like to use the word checkup. Lots of check-ins. I know one particular executive was interesting because he set up with his team. He'd set up a 10-minute checkup 3 or 4 times a week with his team leaders. I'm just going to close. When I started this, there was no sunshine coming in the window, and now it's just killing me.
Okay.
So I know we're in the middle of our. Let me just do that.
We can see better.
Much better. So he set up frequent meetings with his employees, and they were fairly short. And then they got back into the office, and one of his employees comes and says, "Hey, can we keep the same rhythm of meeting? Because I'm really feeling good about the fact that we're talking more frequently, even though we're not spending as much time." So a practice that worked well for him remotely, because he needed to be talking to them more frequently. The person wanted to have that more in the office because they really wanted to have those check-ins to just confirm that, hey, I'm on the straight and narrow.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, most people don't show up at work saying, I'm indifferent about whether I accomplish anything today, or I want to do a bad job. I mean, everybody wants to do a good job.
Mm-hmm. And
I was just going to say the other thing, if I may,
no,
on people being more productive. It's interesting because I think back before the pandemic, probably for a year or two beforehand, when people were really busy. I'd find that I'd be talking to clients and they'd say, "Dave, call me on my cell phone today. Don't call me at my work office phone." I'd say, how so? And they say, "I'm working from home." "Why are you working from home?" "Because I need to get something done." So people were already starting to get away from the office for a day or two, maybe a week or a day or two a month, because they could focus better at home. So I think we've seen the benefits of that. And it's interesting because there's lots of people who have been working from home with small children there, because in the pandemic, your kids didn't go back to school. You're surrounded by them. And yet the measured statistics are suggesting that the productivity has been higher. The challenge is we need to bring back some of the relational and social aspects of working in a group that are having people struggle with connection, and that's going to have a long-term fatigue issue if we don't combine the two, working together face to face and working from home.
Very interesting. How about, let's talk about employees' well-being, health-wise and also mental health as well. What have we gone through with the pandemic? It never happened before on that scale. People definitely struggling with a health issue, or they have somebody in a family that's struggling with some of those issues. And there's also, a social aspect where we are, working ourselves in silos, and there's an impact on the mental health as well. From leadership standpoint, those issues we never tackled before to the extent that we need to tackle now. Where do you think that leadership's changing that? How do people do that remotely? Because you're not face to face. Sometimes it's hard to read people what they might have some struggles that they're going through that we're not aware of it. From when working in a business environment, because meeting after meeting you're going through it, but you don't realize somebody's personal challenges. So how do you handle that? I know if you see some different styles that changing that approach.
That's a good question. Some of what's necessary is to not approach every meeting with a business agenda as the starting point. So I can think of one person, so they'll take recent holidays or whatever the time of year is. So for example, when they came back, when they had a meeting early in November, they asked, who had fun at Halloween? Did you have kids? Did you have kids visit the house? So they'll spend 10 minutes just talking about stuff that we used to talk about. So let's not worry about everything needs to be about efficiency of use of time to be business oriented. We need to put the human aspect and that social aspect into the meetings. I know of organizations that have events often on a Friday afternoon, 3:00, everybody check in, BYOB as it were, because you're online. And it's a half an hour of the agenda is just see how everybody's doing. On a platform like Zoom, have a little fun activity where people meet in small groups in the breakout rooms, then come back together. So you make it really engaging and you get people to feel a little bit more like, hey, we've been together. So from that aspect, leaders need to make that space for the not everything is about the business, because we are people and we have relationships. I'd say the other piece is that you're right. We haven't confronted the same kinds of health issues, particularly in the area of mental health. And what I'm noticing is that from home, a lot of people are not creating boundaries for themselves. So even though, so if you were working in downtown Toronto, you've probably saved yourself a 45-minute commute either way, no matter where you were living, because commute time in Toronto is a lot. So you'd think, wow, that's an hour and a half. Things must be more relaxed. But what's happening is people get up, immediately go to their computer, start working, and they work the whole day. They don't take enough breaks. They don't do things like go for a walk or stretch or drink lots of water. And then the end of the day comes, and in some cases, so for example, one person I know that their computer was at the kitchen table or in a place that was really close to the kitchen, and it was always there. And so the problem was they would finish dinner and they'd see the computer and they go, oh, I've got more work to do, because we all have endless to-do lists. And they go and I'm just going to do a little bit more work. And so we start to lose the sense of I went to work and I came home from work, which you would do in a physical environment. So one of the things I think leaders need to do is to really help employees create boundaries and to reinforce those boundaries, and not be sending out emails on Saturdays and Sundays, and not be sending out emails at 11 o'clock at night. I mean, if you're a leader and you have to write those emails, that's okay. I mean, you might want to do that yourself. What you should do is something as simple as in Outlook, put them on a delay so that they go out the next morning at 8 o'clock in the morning and not at 11 o'clock at night, or don't send them out on the weekends. We need to role model behaviors that teaches people that it's okay to have a boundary. In fact, it's more than okay, it's necessary, because the long term, we can't run a marathon as a sprint. So because we'll burn out. So I think it's incumbent upon the leaders to really reinforce that. And if they're seeing people sending emails very late at night, they should reach out to them and say, I really don't want you to be doing this. And if I've set expectations where you think you have to do this, let's talk about that. And so we'll change those expectations. As opposed to, I think some are saying, hey, if people want to work those really, really long hours, why would I stop them? Well, I think you'd stop them because it's not healthy in the long run.
Very interesting. Definitely, you want to lead with the behavior that you have, that so people can follow. So that brings an interesting point, David. We talk about a lot of issues that leaderships they have to deal with. There's so much on their plate on an employee side, also on their business side, leadership side. But they also have a pressure to get back to the revenue levels we had before COVID, right? So, everybody's struggling. Everybody have to pivot somehow. Either they have to pivot services or product, whatever they were selling, find a different ways of doing that. So, business leaders are watching. I know we all struggle with that. The struggle is managing effective, people, make sure we lead properly. Other side is the bitter reality that we need to get back to the revenue levels. We need to increase that productivities, right? So, what do you think that taking a toll on a business leader, but as a person itself, on a personal level, listen, I need to be healthy. I need to have that right clarity as well, that I find a balance between those two. Where you see that, personal development side, back to that, the health and the wellness of the business leader itself before they model their behavior to the employee.
Yes, I think that, and you brought up the word self-care. I think leaders need to exercise great self-care as well, because you can't give to the rest of the business. You can't manage things if there's nothing left for you to give. It's a little bit like the old story of the goose that laid the golden egg. You got to feed the goose, because if you just keep taking eggs and there's no feed for the goose isn't going to make it. And then you lose everything, right? So So it's having the discipline, and this is where either having an accountability partner or a coach or somebody that you can connect with. Because what I find when I even facilitate, sessions on things like time pressure and time and priorities, and people in very different walks of life, they're very different industries, they'll sit down and talk and they'll go, "Oh, wow, you got the same problems I do." And so leaders are all saying, "I'm not the only one." But they're feeling isolated, so they need to get into forums and into sessions and connect with other leaders to know that they're not the only one. And part of this is to, you know, we need to modify our expectations enough to say that if maybe I can't get to where I thought I could unless I work those really extreme long hours, or I need to focus on the things that are the most valuable and the most efficient and urgent. There's a great book called Essentialism by a guy named Greg McEwen, and he wrote a follow-up called Effortless. He has YouTubes. It's the kind of thing where we need to be really thinking smart and working smart. And the extra hours sometimes are not going to help us. And having said that, you're right. It's a struggle because if the top line isn't the way it used to be, then it puts pressure. But we're in this for the long term, so we need to keep that in mind.
Yeah, I find that that getting the clarity, that's where the struggle comes in. You need to stay clear on a message or clear on your goals. What are you trying to do, right? So discipline around your own well-being and a little bit putting some structure around it. It pays big time, because now you can pass that same structure on your staff as well, so they can follow a similar behavior that what you're doing to take care of your health, they can follow to do with their health as well, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So, people who are going through that, David, any word of advice for them? Where do they, if somebody wants to start that, journey, they haven't even looked at it, how to manage people or having to change it. What would you say, where they have to, if somebody wants to start even, going in that direction, what would you recommend? Where do they start, and how do they get on with it? Start working on themselves and also helping the teams.
Well, it'll all begin with I'll say self-awareness. If they have a strong self-awareness, if they really do have good feedback mechanisms, and they have a pretty good sense of what it is that they need, then that's the real starting point. There's no point in going out and trying to develop yourself as a leader if you don't know what you're trying to develop. It's kind of like I would use the analogy of a GPS. I mean, we're very lucky, in this day and age. I used to have a map book in my car. Now I got this little machine, I put in where I want to get to.
It takes you there.
And bingo, it tells me the map because it knows where I'm starting from.
Yeah.
And so leaders make the mistake of sometimes I know where I want to get to, but I don't find out where I'm starting from. So how do you have a map to get there? I mean, it really is exactly like a GPS. And so there are resources out there, like you could go to, you could look up coaches. The International Coaching Federation has a wealth of coaches available on their websites. There's all that, it's a growing profession. So if you know someone who has a coaching practice, talk to them. It's important in the relationship of coaching to find someone that you resonate with as a leader. Not just any coach will do. So, I really encourage people to, if they want to get coaching, is to spend some time in a preliminary meeting, to interview, to really say, is there a chemistry there? So that, because they have to trust that the person's really going to help them. And then, so you figure out what's really going to give you the return on investment for your time spent. And so discovering more about yourself, and then getting some real energy around the map of how to get from where you are to where you really want to be. There are just so many resources out there now, and the advent of more online training and coaching that's been driven as well by the pandemic. So there were many companies and many people that said, if it's not face to face, it's not worth doing. And most of my facilitation as a leadership facilitator was face to face 5 years ago. I'd say predominantly now the work I do is online. And the feedback we get is, wow, this is way more effective than we thought. So it's looking for the resources that suit what it is that you need, but take a moment to step back to say, what is it that I really need? It's kind of like, don't go to the doctor and ask for a prescription without finding what the diagnosis is, right?
Yeah. So people who you worked with David, do they know before they come to you, what problem they have up against, or do you have to help them discover the problem? Right? Do they nail it down? Hey, listen, this is the area I'm looking to help. looking at more help, or do you have to figure out and go on a journey and discover the problem, what they're up against?
Yeah, both are very prevalent. So I'd say there's probably three camps. One is where I'll get approached, and what'll happen is that there'll be a manager and an employee, so a leader and then the leader's boss have had a discussion, and the leader agrees here's a spot, here's a weakness, or here's something I need to develop. And so we'll have a three-way conversation, and we'll agree that I'm going to help coach that person to drive that behavior. So there's something very specific there. Then there's leaders who, without their boss telling them, they just know that they need some help with a particular area. And they come and they're saying, so I want better delegation skills. I want to have better skills around setting expectations, whatever it may be. And then the third camp is that, hey, I want to be a better leader, and I don't really know what that means, right? Because a term like people say, I see people set goals. I want to have better people skills. That's a great ambition, except it's incredibly vague, because there's a wide spectrum of what it means to have quote unquote people skills. So we need to spend time saying, what does that exactly mean? What issues are you trying to address? What are the things that are telling you that you need what it is that you think you need? So I would say my training background has always been helpful, because the best encounter you have with somebody coaching or training is to fulfill something that they know they need, because then there's a motivation to continue to change that behavior because it's going to help.
Interesting. You brought a point, soft skill. I just heard that. Hey, listen, if some of them is a communication. So how big is that? I work with a lot of technical staff, David, in my area, and a lot of young people that I manage on ongoing basis. They're very good on technical skills. Sometimes a little bit shy on a soft skill, because that's the industry I'm in. How big is the challenge for leaderships on a communication side? The communication, either verbal or personal communication, or could be simply non-verbal, or just delivering a right message for leadership. How big is that communication challenge for leadership teams?
It's a big challenge. Soft skills in some ways is maybe also a topic or an identified area that doesn't have full understanding. Some people equate soft skills to, okay, you need to be nice. That's what soft skills mean. For me, soft skills means respect. So when someone develops soft skills, they develop an ability to respect others. So the way I communicate to you, I tell you honestly and effectively what it is that I want to say to you. I don't sugarcoat my messages. I don't shy away from a difficult conversation. However, I'm never attacking the person. I'm attacking the issue. I'm always talking about how I think I may be able to help you. And then I'm a really good listener. I had a role model. His name was Murray, a CEO I worked for, and he once told me soft skills don't mean soft expectations. And then we talked about what soft skills meant, and he was an exceptional listener. He was really good at communicating expectations. When you were doing well, he would tell you. When you weren't doing well, he would tell you. And so it's this ongoing, I need to keep in touch with people. And for me, that's the imperative that those are the soft skills, because when a person does that, then it builds a tremendous amount of trust. And so this is going to be the currency of the future, is that people will want to trust that the person that they're dealing with cares about them and really has their back. And I would say more particularly the younger generations, you can't be just focused on your own agenda. You need to be thoughtful about the other person's agenda. That's what a relationship means. And even as a business leader working with employees, I need to understand that other person's agenda, because if I can align what I need from them with what they want, then we're going to have great success. If I'm only worried about what I want, it's not as successful. If they're only worried about what they want, that's not a great thing either. And so we need to help those people who are maybe more inexperienced to understand that, collaborating and aligning yourself with someone in terms of what you're trying to create together is going to be better than just being competitive and pursuing your own agenda.
Very interesting. Yeah, I know. Definitely, I see that difference. Especially with the younger. What your thoughts are, David, on a lot of young people, kids coming out of universities and colleges? They come up with a different expectation to a business, right? So they're looking for companies they can really trust. You mentioned the trust piece. When a leadership, they're looking for a company with trust, and they're looking for the brand that means something, or they're gonna make a social difference, or they're gonna make some sort of impact on society. So they're looking and almost expecting those kind of behaviors from brands or companies or leaderships. Is that something university is teaching them? What are your thoughts on that? Or is it just a generational gap that they're coming to businesses with those different expectations that we have to cater to those expectations?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I don't know if universities are teaching that. One would certainly hope so.
Mm-hmm.
I know when I graduated from a business school, we didn't really talk about purpose and meaning of work as much as we did about being efficient and so on. So I think the evolution of what makes for great leaders.
Mm-hmm.
I would say it's interesting because I talk to people who say people coming out now they kind of expect to be the president of the company within 5 years. Their expectations are out of whack. Well, I have to admit, I graduated many years ago from a business school where we would do case studies and you would take the role of the president. So
Yeah.
I'd say most of my school colleagues, when we graduated,
Yeah.
we were thought we were going to be president in 5 years too. So I'm not sure that has necessarily changed. I do think that we're seeing companies adjust to the fact that purpose is more important. Mm-hmm. Especially if you do the research. There's a great book called Z-Economy. It uses the Americanized pronunciation of the last letter of the alphabet.
Okay.
So because it wouldn't work as the same as Z-Economy, but it's Z-Economy, and it talks about the economy of Generation Z, and they are a generation that's going to be inspired by meaning. If the research is accurate in terms of, or has predicted what's going to come out. So companies that are doing something that makes a difference, and that's going to be more appealing. And so we've got workers who aren't in it just for a paycheck. Now, and frankly, everybody's in it for their own reasons. So we can't even though I'm generalizing now, we want to be careful of generalizing. And I think that the really effective leader is going to know, so what is it that charges this person's battery, and how can I give them what they want in an organization? So, organizations will have meaning, but some people are going to be driven by, hey, if I can make some extra bucks by working overtime or with a bonus, and they may be incented by money. I think meaningful work, valuable work is going to be much more important, and working for somebody who treats you well. Because I think we're seeing, this recent phenomena called the Great Resignation, where there's a lot of people moving around in industries. And the primary reason, as I'm understanding it with the research, is that they're tired of the way they're being treated. And they're saying, this isn't for me. It's about more than just the paycheck. And it's becoming an employee's market. I mean, the now hiring signs are everywhere. And so, we need to think about, people are going to stay for reasons other than just what happens every 2 weeks in their bank. And that's the leadership imperative to some extent.
Yeah. Well, if you other side, on opportunity side, David, if you can tap into what drive these people and how to manage them better, you now have a competitive advantage over all other industry, right? That productivity level you could gain, people working on to level their potential out there. That's totally, that sets you apart with a lot of companies, right? So now you tapping into what people can do, not what they're doing just for the paycheck, right? Now that's a much bigger opportunity that we lose when we're not tapping into that. If you can really understand what drives people, what they really mean, what they want to do in a work, the potential they have, what they're really doing, that's a big difference, right?
Yes, I can tell you this happened many years ago, but it was in a company I was working for, and without getting into the details of who the companies were, we had a distribution center, and there was another distribution center. It was not in a competing industry, so to speak, because we were in the pharmacy industry and they were in a different industry, but we were both competing for the same kind of talent for the distribution center. They paid $1 an hour less than us, and I remember talking to their senior HR person saying, how do you do the efficiency piece? Because we're paying less, and at the time, wages were like $13 an hour where we were, and $12 an hour at their place. This is several decades ago, and they're saying, you must be less competitive because of this. And I said, well, you're measuring the wrong thing.
Yeah.
What you need to be measuring is the amount of, in this case, it was a pick pack production line. You need to be measuring lined picked, dollars spent per lined picked. And he said, how so? I said, because I'm going to argue that our people are 50% more efficient and we're only paying them 10% more because they love the environment they're working in. They're paid a little bit better, so they know more is expected, and they like being there. And we were able to do different things because we paid them more. And lo and behold, when we did the study, our labor dollars were actually being spent more productively than theirs, even though we were paying people more.
Nice.
And that's entirely a function of leadership and productivity. People wanted to work harder in that environment, right? So if people just show up and do work, sure, they'll get paid. And that's where I come back to the original notion that, the compliance control trap, it's a trap because if you think making people be compliant is the best way to do things, it's kind of like, a deck. If I was building a deck and I said to somebody, I want to build a deck, and they said, okay, and they used a handsaw. A handsaw will get the work done, but I'm going to use a miter saw and I'm going to get it done faster. The tool of the future for the leader is relationship management, not command and control.
Wow, beautiful. That's what those advantages are bringing, right? So you pay 2 or 3% more, but look how much productivity, how much work you're getting. That's definitely set you apart with if you are in a competitive market.
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. Your people can be a competitive advantage, particularly where you're in a service industry and not something that's very commoditized.
We were in technology business. Technology is the same no matter where. We all get from Microsoft, or IBM or any bigger player. But it's what sets you apart is definitely that human potential. Hey, can you get different kind of work out of your people compared to the other ones, right?
Right. Exactly.
Very interesting. So, I learned so much from our discussion. David, definitely, I will recommend business leader watching. I know that the struggle is we got to generate those revenue. We also got to manage people. I will recommend they reach out to you, have a conversation. I learned so much from you, and definitely, I think people will learn so much from your experience and your knowledge that that they can probably make it a transaction much easier what they're going through. Where can people find? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Nope. Go ahead.
Any message you want to leave for those people who are struggling, who are trying to figure things out about themselves and get your help? Any message you want to leave for those people who are trying to just simply start?
Yeah, it's I named the company many years ago Your Leadership Matters because I think it does. I think your leadership matters for all the reasons we've talked about, which is why if you went online you'd find us under yourleadershipmatters.ca. In the end, be the best you can be as a leader and choose to be that leader who can be the best you can be, right? I think that it's the advice of pursue, I talk to people and they say leaders are born, not made. I totally disagree with that. I know lots of people who I would say they weren't naturally great at it, but they worked hard at it and they became exceptional leaders. So, if you want to be better, there's always a place for you. To get better, and just reach out for the right resources, and we can help. Beautiful. Where can people find you on your website? That's the right way of connecting with you, David, or there's a different way of connecting with you? Yep, the website or at david.town at Your Leadership Matters, and it's .ca as opposed to .com. So Your Leadership Matters, all one word. Or just Google it and you'll come up with the website, and there's a contact page there and they can get in touch. And of course, the website describes all of the things that we do. Yeah, you have a lot of good resources. I read a few articles under your blogs. You put a lot of good resources, a lot of information there. I will definitely encourage people to go check it out, your blog as well. There's a lot of information there as well. Great. Good stuff. It's been a pleasure. Hey, likewise, David, I want to appreciate, acknowledge your time you spent with me. I really appreciate the time and thoughts and all the information and all the guidance that you provided during our time. Very good. Thank you so much, David. Take care. Have a good one. You too. Bye-bye. Bye.